Welcome to Someone's Gotta Drive. My name is Jess. One day, someone told me that my life was so interesting that I should write a book because so much has happened in my life. So many stories, whether good or bad, a lot of which are actually very unbelievable, but yet true nonetheless. I want to start this off by giving a little background about me and who I am and why I decided to start this podcast. My name is Jess, and I was born in Fort Rucker, Alabama. My mother was in the Army. My father was from the area. After 36 hours of labor, as the Army's motto is no pain, no gain, that's what they told her and told her a push. Well, I came into this world in October. They wheeled her out of that delivery room with a gallon of vodka and a carton of cigarettes, and she didn't let up until her pancreas did. That was the start of her addictions and kind of the start of my story. I had a sister who is 8 years older than me, so she has many more stories about addictions and other abuses than you may probably want to fathom. But this is my story. We'll get her involved a little bit later. At a certain age, probably around 2, I want to say, we moved to Maryland, Havre de Grace, Maryland to be exact, where my grandmother was. And my mom met my adopted father, in which he moved us out of there and into a lovely home in Forest Hill, Maryland, tried to give us the best life he possibly could. In the meantime, my mother still had her addictions. He was a wonderful man, and he did everything he could for us all. Sometimes I would wake up in the middle of the night to mom having these really off-the-wall seizures. Not just grandma seizures, flailing, screaming, you name it. It was intense, insane, and oftentimes the paramedics were getting called at 2 in the morning. And one of my first memories of one of her seizures was exactly that. And I remember my dad trying his best to keep me in my room and not have me freaked out. But what else does a child do when they're 6 years old and there's paramedics and your mother is flailing and screaming and crying and everything else that under the sun? When I got older, I learned that this was an addiction to alcohol. She really honestly could not stop drinking. She couldn't stop getting her hands on anything you could possibly think of. And throughout a lot of my childhood, I thought these were all normal situations. It wasn't until I started hanging out with friends at their houses and seeing what their parents were like that I realized this isn't right. This isn't normal. This isn't standard. My mom was also a diabetic. Like I had said, she was wheeled out of that delivery room with a gallon of vodka and a carton of cigarettes and didn't let up until her pancreas did. So in the late 80s, early 90s, she pretty much had a pancreas that wasn't working. And very rare in those times that, she survived. But she started on insulin. She was a diabetic. And oftentimes throughout most of my early childhood, I remember my grandmother and other family members telling me, your mother could die at any moment. She is so incredibly sick. No one ever said she was an addict. Everyone said she was incredibly sick and could die any day. That does not help when it comes to a child, anxiety, and everything else you could possibly think of. No child wants to hear that their parent could die at any day. And trust me, it is not something I'm ever going to tell my children. They don't need that kind of stress, worry, or anxiety at such a young age. But growing up, we always knew mom was sick. Not always exactly what, but she was sick. Sometimes it was the diabetes, sometimes it was migraines, sometimes it was just, you didn't even know. She was just sick. And I remember when I was around 12 years old that migraines were a really big problem for her. And our dad was a butcher. He often would need to be up and out the house around 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, depending on where his store was located, because he would often have to commute at least an hour with no traffic to get to that store. And he would have to open up and start very early, get the meat department set up, and start his day. So oftentimes, I was getting woken up at 2 o'clock in the morning saying, come on, we have to go. We have to take your mother in the emergency room. She's in too much pain. She can't handle it anymore. And that's what kind of started the pill addiction. We were pretty common when it came to mom's alcohol, but between the ages of like 6 and 11, she actually quit drinking and she quit smoking. And things weren't too terribly bad. It wasn't until the migraines hit that we learned that maybe there was something else to it. They couldn't find the cause for any of these migraines, and oftentimes we were in the emergency room at 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, my mother screaming in pain, my father just begging them to give her something to, I wouldn't say shut her up, but at the same time, shut her up. She had been writhing in pain for so long, and he was just so tired and worn out. There wasn't much more he could really do. Eventually, they went to the doctor, and the doctor agreed to give her OxyContin, 5 milligram pills at a time, only as needed, to help with the migraines. And we were hoping that this would keep her out of the emergency room. Oftentimes at age 12, 13, 14, my dad would wake me up, take me to the hospital with them, so that way someone was with her, and then he would go to work. Sometimes I would miss school, sometimes I wouldn't. For a while, the pills did seem to work, but then we ended up back in the hospital again. Milligrams just wasn't enough, and now we're asking the doctor to start increasing her dosage to help keep us out of the emergency room. Well, the doctor had decided not to give them to her anymore and told her she needed to go see pain management. At that same time, due to other surgeries that she had had, that we will discuss later on in other episodes, she was actually having these bowel obstructions. So she went back to her surgeon and said, hey, I'm in pain. Get this pancreas out of me. Open me up. Figure out what's going on. I want it to end. And the doctor actually told her at one point in time, you have to stop taking the pain pills. They're not helping what scars you have. They're causing bowel blockages. They're not great for you. You need to stop taking them. So she stopped seeing that doctor and went to another doctor who told her exactly what she wanted and gave her exactly what she wanted. After a while, especially as a teenager, I started realizing these were all addictions. This wasn't good. This wasn't right. This wasn't safe. Oftentimes, my mom would say, go to the liquor store and go on bouts of drinking. And she would get my dad like a wine cooler or something and say, see, you're drinking, just to make it seem like it was okay. Meanwhile, I know that I wasn't the best of children, and I know that I was your typical teenager. But most of the fights that I was having with my parents was, my mom's an addict, and this isn't right, and she needs to stop, and she's putting us in danger. Oftentimes, when I went to the doctor for my checkups, they would ask me how things were going. I would be honest about it. All of a sudden, I'm getting talked to from my parents on the way home about how I'm not allowed to tell them that my mother's an addict, that I'm not allowed to tell them that she's abusing her medication, or that she's drinking and driving with me in the vehicle. Oftentimes, being my father worked for a grocery store, he didn't just work mornings, he worked evenings. And sometimes she would take that time that he was gone to get absolutely obliterated. And then by the time he got home, she would be sobered up and everything would be done. I remember one time in particular that she was so drunk that I called my dad at work and said, something's not right with mom. I don't know what, but something's not right. She's not acting right. And he told me, whatever you do, don't call me at work again. And you tell your mother that I said no one is to call me at work again. So I hung up the phone. I told my mother that, in which she proceeded to call him at work again. A fight ensued between me and her because I kept hanging up the phone on her and saying, no, Dad said we can't call him. He's working. Leave him alone. She threw me into a wall, ripped my hair out of my head, and proceeded to tell me I wasn't going to tell her what to do. I was the child. She was the adult. And I remember looking at her and saying, then act like it. Stop acting like a child and do what Dad says. So she calls him, and after they speak, she puts me on the phone with him, and I get yelled at. What did I tell you? I told you to tell her not to call me at work anymore. I did do exactly as you said. But unfortunately, it didn't matter. I went upstairs into my room. I actually barricaded a dresser behind the door so my mother couldn't get in. And at that point, she was literally banging on the door, trying to get in. And finally, she realized that her actions were the reason why I had barricaded myself in my room. I was just going to wait for my dad to come home. When he did come home, I had some hair missing from my head, blood running down my face, and he just took one look at me and went, oh, when I meant Mom wasn't acting right, I really meant it. I closed the door, left myself in there, and she was like, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean it. I didn't mean it. Well, honestly, she never remembered it. The next day, she just looked at me and went, what happened to you? And my dad and I just had to look at each other, and I knew something had happened. She had been drinking or something, but I knew something had happened. I was only about 12 years old at the time, and I knew that this wasn't the life that I wanted to live. Fast forward to a few years later, and I got my first high school boyfriend. We would hang out at his house. I didn't always want him over at my house, but we would hang out at his house. And I watched his parents, who had friends over on the weekends, didn't mind having a few drinks. And never once did they act like that. If his mother had one drink, she would say, I started drinking. I can't drive. It opened my eyes. Just because someone is drinking doesn't mean that they're an addict. Just because someone has to take medication doesn't mean that they're always sick. And I realized that what I thought was going to be my life of addiction and problems and illnesses wasn't the case. And that learning how to just, drink responsibly, that was safe to do as well. And that's when I think the fights between me and my parents started even worse. Was because honestly, I knew just you can have a drink. You don't have to be an asshole. But oftentimes my mom just didn't know how to stop. She didn't know how to just have one or to just enjoy the buzz. She had to get so hammered that she couldn't see straight. And I remember one year, probably 12 years old again, for 4th of July, she had drank a bunch of beers, and she asked me to go get her another one. And I said, no, if you want it, you go get it. Well, the reason why she was asking me to go get it was because she literally couldn't walk. She couldn't stand. But that woman army crawled around a whole farm to come and bring me down for telling her, no, I'm not getting you a beer. Once again, I knew those things weren't right. I knew those things weren't normal. So, as a teenager, I was given a car, and my dad looked at me and said, what I do puts food on the table. What you do, going to school, doesn't. So I'm going to give you a car. I'm going to pay for you to get your license. But you are going to have to pay for the insurance. You're going to have to pay for the gas. And you're going to have to get your mother to her doctor's appointments. I'm done with this. And that's exactly what I did. I went to school. I went to work full time. And when I had to, I made sure my mom got to her doctor's appointments when needed. I was always told, we're not paying for college. You're either going into the military, or you're going directly into work, or you're going to college. But you're paying for college on your own, and you're going to work at the same time. And if you're living under our roof, you're also going to pay us rent. I was not exactly set up for success. And when I was 17, I was about to graduate from high school. My mother had been nodding off from taking her pills and almost hit her face into the floor while sitting on the edge of her bed. And I kept trying to wake her up and trying to wake her up. And finally, I picked her up and put her on her bed, literally threw her onto her bed because I was like maybe 100 pounds and she was like 130. So it wasn't easy for me to pick her up and just gently put her on her bed. Well, she thought I had forcefully pushed her. And I went and I said, that's not what I did. And I went to work. I came home for lunch that day, and my mom just looked at me and said, well, we need to have a conversation and we can talk about it after work. And I said, well, I'm kind of here now. So what's the deal? She said, I don't care for how you forcefully pushed me. And, we really just don't get along. And I think it's going to be in your best interest now that you have forcefully pushed me and put your hands on me, that maybe you should go live with your uncle. At the time, I was 17 years old, legally couldn't exactly be emancipated, and I was 2 weeks away from being a high school graduate. I really didn't know what I was going to do with life because I wasn't signed up for any college. No one would sign off on me going into the military. And all I could really do was kind of work a full-time job at the local grocery store because it's all I knew how to do. I figured that was what my life was going to be, working at a grocery store or at minimum wage because I had no other skills in life. And I didn't know what I was going to do. And now I'm being told that I'm being kicked out of the house and I'm going to go live with my uncle. My uncle, who's an alcoholic, who she can't even live with. This was my punishment. To find out, I was only 4 months away from turning 18. And to find out, the government, because she was a veteran, was actually paying her a little extra to have me. So instead of me going on my own or anything like that, this was her way of making sure she could still get the paycheck for me. But I went to go live with my uncle. At first glance, I thought it was going to be a great thing. I was going to get into another county. I was going to go where no one knew me. I was going to start this whole new, fresh life. And shortly after that, my grandmother came down with cancer. And my grandfather had a massive heart attack and stroke and lost his ability to speak. And my uncle and I, well, I was home and I was caring for the house, but, I was pretty much eating him out of house and home, and he was getting really no money for me to be there. And so it wasn't easy for him either financially. He was trying to teach me how to cook, how to clean, and how to do things that he thought I didn't know how to do. I didn't really know how to cook, but I definitely knew how to clean. I got a job at a local grocery store, met my ex-husband there, and thought life was going to be great. Even though we had some hardships with my family, I really thought life was going to be good. Then my grandmother died. And he did not take that very well. And I wasn't really close with my mom at that point. One of the reasons why was because I felt like I had been very much mistreated. And my uncle believed my story. He knew that I didn't do anything wrong. He knew that my mother was a drug addict. He would tell me stories about how she would sometimes take his pills or, drink all his alcohol, and how, he knew that we were doing the best that we could as children, pretty much raising ourselves. My mom never woke up with us in the morning and got us ready for school. She never did anything along those lines. We maybe saw her in the evening after school, and that was sometimes, because sometimes she also worked as a bartender. Sometimes we just didn't see her at all, which is pretty common for a lot of children with working parents. But when I got kicked out of the house, I asked my dad, can't you fight for me? This is what happened. I swear to you, I didn't put my hands on her forcefully. I was trying to save her from breaking her nose. And he just said, you know what? You and your mom haven't gotten along for a really long time. Let's see how this works. Maybe it's going to be for the best. And I looked at him and said, you're going to be next. You're going to come home one day and you're going to be kicked out of the house that you built with your own two hands. And he just kind of brushed me off. Well, that Christmas didn't turn out too well. And I ended up moving out of my uncle's house. I was 18. And I moved in with my ex-husband's mom. I stayed with her for about 6 months until my ex-husband graduated high school, because I was only about 8 months older than him. That was also very tumultuous. She unfortunately suffered from bipolar disorder, and she too had her own addictions: alcohol, pills, gambling, you name it. And I did everything I could to make sure that all her bills were paid, so she didn't have to worry about that while I was there. But oftentimes I would still find my stuff out in the yard. We didn't live in a very nice neighborhood, so a lot of times all my stuff had been rummaged through, stolen, you name it. And my ex, he was in high school. He did everything he could to talk to his mom and say, look, Mom, she's doing all this stuff for you. Why are you treating her like this? And he would talk a little sense into her and call it a day. But oftentimes, I would sleep in one of our cars in a park somewhere, pretty much homeless, because I knew I wasn't welcome really anywhere, and I didn't know what the hell I was doing with my life. After he graduated, we got our own place. His aunt rented it out to us, and we went to work. He started working right out of high school, and I did the same thing. Don't get me wrong. We were young, we were stupid, and we had definitely smoked our fair share of pot. But while working for a pizza shop, he was breaking down a desk. He didn't break it down into smaller pieces, thought he could just fling these large pieces over his head and into a dumpster, in which at that moment, he almost broke his back. Wouldn't say broken or hairline fracture, it was just that close to being broken, but it wasn't. Took him to the doctor, and the first thing they did was start him on painkillers. And to this day, I swear, that's where his addiction started. As a teenager, yeah, he had drank and he had smoked, and he had probably taken a pill or two here or there, but his addictions really started when the doctor said, okay, well, first things first, we got to alleviate the pain. So here's a painkiller, here's a muscle relaxer, here's an anti-inflammatory. And he was on that for months. Physical therapy helped, and physical therapy helped get him off of the painkillers. But he also had a family condition where his teeth grew in with no enamel. So a lot of times he was dealing with a lot of tooth decay and tooth problems. And at one point, we had taken him to the dentist often. And they would say, man, liquid morphine can't even touch the pain that you must be going through. And they were kind of right. So a lot of times his pill addictions were due to some sort of pain that he was in. And that was one of those situations where legitimately he was in pain and he needed something. While we were trying to take care of his teeth issues, we would get them rebuilt. We would sometimes have them removed. We would do whatever we could. At the same time, my mother was also addicted to pills. And by this point, she was snorting 210 milligrams of OxyContin up her nose a day. We had gone to her doctor. We had gone to the pharmacist. We had gone to anyone who would listen to us. And they said, well, it's being prescribed to her, so how she takes it's on her. We don't care how she takes it. She can take it however she wants. It's hers. It's being prescribed to her. Every month, almost on the dot, ever since I was a teenager, she was always in the hospital with these bowel blockages. And part of it is that, well, Opioids slow down the digestive tract. Her stool couldn't get past the scar tissue that had also inflamed due to the opioids as well, causing these bowel blockages. We would send her to the emergency room. They would put an NG tube in. They would keep her for a few days. They'd make her go what's called NPO, where she couldn't have any food or water while her GI had rest. They'd reset her and send her home, and this would start up all over again. We tried everything from dietary restrictions and whatnot, but once again, we knew, especially after her talking to the one doctor when I was 12 years old, and he said, to stop the pain, you have to stop taking the pain medicine. I knew the only way that this was going to stop was if she stopped doing the drugs. No matter how many times we tried putting her in rehab, she would say she would go. She would get out of the hospital and go, yeah, I'm not doing that. And I remember at one point in time, she looked at me when I would watch that A&E show, Intervention, and she would say, don't get your hopes up, because I'm not doing it. We were at an impasse. There wasn't much that could be done. One day I was at work. My dad called me, and he said, hey, your mom's at the hospital. And I said, well, that's kind of shocking. You never call me and tell me she's at the hospital. He's like, yeah, usually we don't call you because it's the same stuff, different day. You know, once a month we go in, we do the NG tube, we clear her out. But I hate to tell you this, we've already been here for a full day and it is not working. And now the doctors are talking surgery. Well, that was a bit shocking. We have talked surgery in the past, but not to the point where my dad felt the need to call us and say, I actually think you need to get to the hospital. My ex and I finished up our day at work, notified our employers, and said, hey, we have to run to the hospital. We don't know what's about to happen. We don't know what's going on, but we'll keep you updated. And I really don't know if I'm going to be in tomorrow. And we went to the hospital and didn't know when we would be coming home.